Hello and welcome to the Actual Magician's Bookshelf. Yes, I am an actual magician. And today in episode 22 we are going to be looking at good magic, effective magic, evil magic, bad magic, black magic, white magic, and that whole range of definitions, and I hope to change your mind about what you may think you know about those definitions. We may cover terms such as the left-hand path, the right-hand path, and so forth, but I'm really going to concentrate this video on effective magic versus bad magic. Not good and evil, but effective and bad. And to do that, we are going to be looking at Magick Without Tears. This is Aleister Crowley's letters to a student, collected and written towards the end of his life. So it's a summary, and in some cases it does contradict a lot of his earlier work and so forth, and he makes it well known that it does so within this book. So this is his final summation, I guess. And it was originally going to be published as Aleister Explains Everything. So I like to refer to this book quite a bit. This one has been around a bit. It was actually a friend of mine's copy back in 1985. This goes back to, and a little bit before. And we're also going to be looking at Kabbalah and Psychology by Zev Ben Shimon Halavai, Warren Kenton. And this is one of Halavai's books that I found very useful when I was first studying Kabbalah back in the day, and we're particularly going to be using this to refer to what's called Jacob's Ladder, which looks horrendously complicated, but it's reasonably straightforward as far as we're going to take a look at it today. And this is the four worlds, because it's used to break down different layers of our being, which is really important. And I may well refer to this diagram, Tree of Life diagram, that was probably dictated by Aleister Crowley to Norman Mudd, one of his students, and I don't think this has been published before, but it's quite useful because Crowley was obviously riffing on the ideas of the identity, the human self, awareness, consciousness, and the way we attach ourselves to things as part of our natural state, which is what magic is aiming to work with and beyond. So let's just take a look first of all at what Crowley says about the left-hand path and the so-called Black Brothers. And this is letter 12 of Magick Without Tears. And he immediately starts it with, "It is the introduction of the word self that has raised such prickly questions." And he talks about perhaps the letter that had been written to him was asking about the so-called Black Brothers. And Crowley actually makes it really clear what he talks about in terms of effective magic, bad magic, and so forth. And he says this: "What happens when the aspirant invokes Diana or calls up Lilith?" And I'll come back to that in a moment. "He increases the sum of his experiences in these particular ways." He basically is saying that there are only two functions possible in nature: addition and subtraction. You either add something or you take something away in all of your negotiations, communications, transactions with reality, as long as you are separate to it or consider yourself separate to reality. And so Crowley goes on to say, "The aspirant increases the sum of their experience in these particular ways. Sometimes they have a liaison experience which links two main lines of thought, and so it is worth dozens of isolated gains." Crowley is fairly keen throughout his life to talk about the focused way, that you are always serving your intent, purpose, and will, rather than doing something and like a ship going from side to side, never actually going forwards because you're always distracted from one thing to another. And because your will isn't singular, then there is the danger of one thing undoing another, that you constantly sabotage your will because your will isn't fixed, and your will should be the most fixed rudder at the back of your ship in order to steer you forwards. And he goes on to say, if there is any difference at all between the white and the black adept in similar case, it is that one, working by love under will, achieves a marriage with the new idea, and he's talking about invoking Diana or calling up Lilith, and at the same time, any new idea that you have about identity and yourself and your relationship with the universe. So he says that a so-called black adept and a white adept, a good or evil magician, however you want to term it, it's a similar case in that both have invoked the same thing into their existence to add it to their experience, but one, working by love and a will, achieves a marriage with the new idea. A marriage with the new idea, while the other, merely grabbing, adds a concubine to his harem of slaves. The about-to-be black brother constantly restricts themselves. He is satisfied with a very limited ideal. He is afraid of losing his or her individuality. And this is the main point that Crowley is making, that the difference is irrelevant until a particular stage of one's magical initiatory progress. If you're working with the initiation system, then you are constantly shifting in large long-term stages your sense of identity and relationship to the universe. Also, your state of awareness is constantly shifting in steps, and as a result, your individuality and your sense of individuality will shift. If you're just working what we would call, in Crowley's terms, witchcraft, which is not to be confused with how most people consider it these days. Witchcraft is merely moving things around, merely doing a spell to move one thing into another, and it's constantly just shifting things around, and you are still attached to them, and your state of identity is still the same, and you are not asking the questions anymore of your experience or testing your experience to progress any further. This is what I sometimes say, there are a lot of very good zealotors in the occult sphere because they may be very experienced, very certain, which is usually a giveaway, and so forth, but their progress in terms of the initiation system has got completely and utterly stuck. As my teacher once said to me, it's all ice cream, and it's different flavours of ice cream, and some people are happy taking all of the different flavours, but at some point you realise that you have had enough of ice cream and want to change your diet and move on to something else, perhaps something even more healthier as well. And this can be modelled in Kabbalah, and this book is a very good way of modelling that, although it sticks itself to psychology as opposed to the esoteric system. But if we take a look at this, we can see that there are four worlds. There's a physical tree of life overlaid with a psychological, spiritual, and what I would call a mystical tree, which is referred to as the divine tree here. And you'll notice the important thing I just want you to notice from this is the fact that, if I can get a pointer here, there is a Malkuth arising from the Tifereth of each tree. So each tree is planted in the middle of the tree below it, and as a result you get an interesting overlap here. Let's see if I can get that one there, where we have the top of one tree, the middle of another tree, and the bottom of the third tree up. So it's this point that is a significant point in what we're talking about today. So we'll come back to that in a moment, but just bear that in mind, that that's in the back of your mind in terms of having these overlaps on the tree of life. Because then when we're looking at a tree of life, we know that out of here is coming something, and also there is a overlap, particularly in Darth, which means knowledge or pure illusion. This explains an awful lot about some of the things that Crowley says about initiation. The initiation system is better modelled with 4 trees stacked on top of each other in what's called Jacob's ladder. But for now, let's just place knowledge here and ego and personality here, although Crowley has put it also here in Tiferet, so consciousness. Wherever it goes, let's just think about those things. Let's think about ego, identity, knowledge, and illusion and experience, all as being fairly central to our position on the tree of life. Now, what Crowley is saying in Magick Without Tears is that ultimately good and effective magic is a marriage where we dissolve ourselves in the bonds of union, love under will. So our intent is to dissolve ourselves, to marry ourselves to the new idea, to the new experience. And going back to Lilith, as I mentioned that we might do, one of my very first spells was the traditional, I guess, love spell. My first spell was a money spell. My second spell was a love spell. You might know it. And I was, 13 or 14 at the time, and I wanted a partner, a girlfriend, and I had somebody in mind, and I cast a love spell. And it worked. It bound me to that person, irrespective of their own will. And as a result, when that was repelled because of the force that I'd invoked into it, it was like a ship moving away. I was still fastened to it. And as a result, even though as that ship moved off, there were lots of other ships revealed in the harbour that were perhaps far more suited to me and to my journey, and hopefully to their journey. As a result, I was fastened to this one particular ship that was moving off into the distance. So what I had to do, because of the attachment that I'd made through the magical link, through the magical spell and the components of it and the intent of it, I had to release myself to undo the spell. And it is really, really difficult to undo that energy. And what I chose to do at the time was invoke Lilith, who I knew was a sort of killer of things, killer of children, in the sense of I'd made a creation through the magical work, that I invoked Lilith, and that was a terrifying experience at the time, particularly as I was quite young, and it took a while to actually then remove Lilith. I don't know if you can even say such a thing, but for us to part on reasonable terms, having invoked that energy to cut the other energy to which I'd been attached. And it was a total mess, but I did learn a lot about how a spell works, how magic works, how will works, how intent works, and more importantly, how identity and attachment work. A later spell, for example, that I would call a good spell was when my family and I at the time were very desperate. We had no money. We had literally run out of food, which is hard to believe in Western society, but nonetheless, I was in that situation. I was very ill, so couldn't go to work at the time, and I was working at a college. We did a spell out of desperation. It was one to the Lares and the Penates, the Roman household and family spirits. We just asked them to look after us because we couldn't look after ourselves at that time. And there was a knock on the door the following day, and the head of the HR department, the human resources department, was at the door. And because it was a hospitality and catering college, she had got together with a load of the students, and they had used the kitchens to do a massive meal, a meal to last several days of lots of different foodstuffs and things like that, and drinks and desserts and everything. And she arrived with a small car open at the back, and they offloaded all of this provisions for us, for the family, out of the blue. We'd not asked for it, we didn't expect it, and that helped feed our family for the several days that it took for me to get better and get back to work. But I still have a photo of that somewhere, of our kitchen just totally up to here with food and drink and provisions to last us through that time. And that is a spell where we are in fact balancing things, and we have no expectations, no ego reward or anything along those lines. And the problem is, as Crowley says, that the erstwhile soon-to-be black magician, evil magician, will actually accrete knowledge to themselves, and they will use what they are doing, no matter how internally represented it is, or particularly how externally represented it may appear, even in humility or passive humility. It tends to be a sort of, well, yes, I did invoke a particular demon, or I did do this, or I did do that. But there is no learning from that. There is no state change from that. There is no release from that. And in fact, they will try and accrete other people, as Crowley says, like a black hole to their knowledge, to their experience. And as Crowley puts here, knowledge is pure illusion, which he also mentions in the letter here as well. And what happens is the yesod of the lower tree, and we're coming back to those trees now, those overlapping trees, the yesod of the lower tree is now overlapping with the darth of the next tree, or the darth of this tree is overlapping with the yesod of the next tree. And as a result, one's sense of self, one's sense of relationship to the world is an increasing attachment. As a result, until a particular grade can be reached, there is a problem, because that generates a sense of control and power in the illusion that one is separate to the universe. You cannot have control unless there are two things, the controller and that which is being controlled. And that is an illusionary state. It's a state that the ego can manifest. It's the state that can be held in that. And then we end up with all sorts of philosophical knots that belong to Hod on the Tree of Life, illusion in thought, and also illusion by the operation of the above forces in form itself, in that person's space. So it could be that they appear to be knowledgeable, they appear to be experienced, but their actual state and relationship to the universe is illusionary, because it's all being projected out. And this is a problem that happens a lot in occultism. And I think some of it is because it's been compounded by the internet, because the internet is entirely presentational. It's entirely a screen of experience being presented to us all of the time. And our poor human brains don't understand that sometimes what we are experiencing is not real. It's not as it appears to be. And of course, a screen can show you anything at all. Now, one of the things that we have to do as we make progress is use our experiences to question the nature of reality, and this leaves us with an open state. It's always important, and this is how we know what someone's state is by the questions that they're asking. And this is why in our Order of Everlasting Day, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of regular questioning, in fact, by the angels, the Gregorian angels that you see the book down here that we have. There are 4 fixed Gregorian angels, as we call them, at the 4 quarters, and they ask certain questions, and we use that opportunity to ask those questions of ourselves in a constant spiral, so that we are hoping to move beyond wherever we might feel that we are on the tree. And so as a result, we slowly move up through stages of revelation internally and are trying to root the next tree in our awareness, in the tifreth of whichever tree we are working in at any given time. We use our awareness to bring down and unite with the next tree above. We don't do it through knowledge. We don't do it through experience. That is Malkuth, that is Darth, and that they are arising out of state of illusionary separation. And so when someone is confidently teaching you something, always think, I wonder what questions they have about the universe. They seem really sure that they can invoke a demon, or they can do a journey to the 9th plane of Zathras, but are they sure that that is their experience? Are they sure in their knowledge? In which case they must be sure about the entire composition and running of the whole universe. When I first started, my teacher once said, the moment you do a tarot reading and it is in any way accurate to something that then transpires in time, you should stop for possibly the rest of your life to ask yourself, what the bleep just happened? How did that work? How can that work? And how can the universe be so different to how I appear to be experiencing it in linear time, for example? And how can I then experience and be in the state of the universe as it actually is, if this is the case? Or is this a misinterpretation of the results that I have attained from my experiment? And Crowley called Magick and Thelema in total scientific illuminism. And this is where we can put the checks, the tests on our actual magic. So there is no good and evil, black and white, left-hand path, right-hand path. Ultimately, at a particular point, all of those things are based on a sort of dualism that is entirely illusionary. And the work of the magician, particularly in the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, the Holy Guardian Angel relationship is only there to take you so far as well, as Crowley says, to the abyss. And at that point, you have to have an entire sense of self and relationship in order to finally let go of the whole thing. And Crowley, in that particular letter, which is, what did we say, letter 12, page 109 of this copy, on the left-hand path talks about how that dissolution actually works. And he also usefully gives a selection of visions, mainly from the vision and the voice, the Enochian workings of an appendix to the letter itself. So he talks about the angel reappears. It's from one of the visions in the vision and the voice, and a few other quotes, I think perhaps from the Book of Lies, or I think they're all from the ethers of the vision and the voice, actually, of explaining the whole system in terms of these visions. So I highly recommend perhaps reading letter 12, the left-hand path, or the so-called Black Brothers in Magick Without Tears, and really taking time to think about it and think about what it means for your magical path, your intent, your expectations, and particularly expectations of those who may be unbeknownst even to themselves, for in the moment you think you know something, the moment you think you have got anything sorted, that accretion can build before you know it. And it's really important to have a good teacher who can help break that down from the outside, because initiation can only be done in that sense from somebody else, from the outside of you. And it's said, one by one, we take them out of the world. And it's really important that you don't feel lost inside yourself or sure inside yourself. And there is a balance, and Crowley calls this like a gyroscope, that is maintained, because it can be easily distracted by just touching it for a moment, and the whole gyroscope just spins out of control. And it's very easy to check a so-called black brother, or one might call them an evil adept or anything like that, by asking them questions, and particularly certain questions, and seeing their reaction to them, whether they withdraw from that and then get really spiky and defensive, or whether they are slick and controlling of the answer, or whether they just say, that's a really good question, I'm glad you asked that, what do you think, what do I think, and use that to help themselves and you dissolve and marry the entire universe, rather than, as Crowley says, just add a new bauble to your chain. And that's why I think it's a really important lesson within the occult field. So thank you for listening. If you've got any particular questions, I would be glad to answer them if I can, to discuss them with you, and just drop them below. And I think I'll do a few more episodes based on Magick Without Tears, because this is Crowley's final summation of his life's work, and it's really got a lot of gems in it that I think people don't ever get to look at or read, because they're too busy reading all of the demon summoning books and everything else that is now flooding the esoteric market with occult knowledge and experience, but without necessarily thinking about the initiatory purposes that Crowley and others really developed the system for. So thank you again for listening, and I look forward to your questions as ever. And until then, the worker is hidden in the workshop.